3, 2, 1, boom. Okay. Welcome everybody to the second and final deliberation for the Rochester City School District's 2020-21 budget year. We're going to be going over sections 6, 7, 8, and 9 today. However, section 7 is EPO's updates in terms of their further reduction. So they'll be presenting that after we do the deliberations, which on section 6, 8, and 9. So I will Robin everyone, and I'll give the order now because we didn't get to pull names like we did last time in order of questions for each of the sections. So I'm going to do it based on how I see folks on my screen. So the first person to my left is Commissioner Powell. You're going to be first. Yes, Marisol.
Please don't forget we have a presentation prior to the round robin beginning.
From
Deputy Superintendent regarding COVID-19.
Oh, yes. So let me just give the order and then I'll have her do the presentation and then we'll go into deliberations questions. Thank you. So Commissioner Powell, you're going to be first because you're the first person I see on my screen on the left. Commissioner Adams, you're the second person I see on my screen to the right. Then further down, I see Commissioner Malloy. You're the third person in order. And then President White, you're the fourth to my left. Commissioner Elliott, you're the fifth to my left. And then I know Commissioner Shepard is here, but I do not see her on my screen, but I know she's here. So Commissioner Shepard, you're gonna be sixth. And then I'll go last. And so we'll go around in that order. Does everybody have their number? Thumbs up. All right, thank you guys. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Linda Quick, who's going to give a presentation on a COVID-19 update.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, and I am going to keep this brief, and it actually says budget deliberation because there are a couple of updates that I want to point out about some changes that we have made since last week in our budget presentation to you. I think this might be round 4 of changes, but I did want to point those out as well. But if we can proceed to the next slide, I want to just point out a couple of things. I guess that's the first thing, the COVID will be at the end. So let me jump in here. If this is okay, Commissioner LeBron, I want to just point out a couple of changes that we have made since last week in the budget for your consideration. And these were changes based upon what the feedback was from the board and the community conversations that we've heard, that we felt it was important to make these adjustments to present back to you for this afternoon. Would it be acceptable for me to go through those?
Yes, continue.
Thank you. So the first change that I'd like to point out, we heard a lot of conversation about the multilingual department and our reduction in the executive director of multilingual services. And we also heard a lot of conversation about the reduction in the director of arts. So we went back and looked at all of the budget again. Again, this was a true team effort. A lot of people put their eyes on this to come up with this, but what we have done is looked at first the multilingual department and the current 14.4 FTEs that are in the 2020-21 budget. 1.2 of those FTEs are vacant, and we would propose reducing those to identify some funding sources. Because we are servicing L students, Title I funding can be allocated in part to help fund a position, 50% of a position. So what we have done is, in addition to the current budget 2021 that has a director of bilingual, we are adding back in another director position to support L students. So we'll actually have 2 directors in that department, not an executive director and director, but 2 side-by-side directors, one for bilingual and one for L students. We will use funding from those 1.2 FTEs and then the additional 50% funding from Title I to help fund that. The other thing I would point out, however, is it did generate some extra funding. And as part of that, we would like to also reinstate the Director of Arts, use the funding left from swiping those 1.2 FTEs The net impact on the general fund in doing all of this is $6,000. And we think that that would be a great compromise to get back both of those positions, at least to be able to get a director position back, if not the executive director. But it does support two major initiatives and concerns that we heard repeatedly raised. The next slide, we heard the board very loud and clear that the Chief of Student Support Services is an issue for many of you based upon the poll that was presented last week. So we have restored that to SEG. I would point out, as in addition to this, however, that we had proposed several SEG cuts in addition to just this position, and those cuts remain. That includes 2 school chiefs, as well as the Chief of Accountability. And from there, I just want to go through and cover a couple of things. I'm not going to cover this one very much in detail because we did cover it last week, but we did hear ongoing concerns about executive director positions. So I just want to cover very briefly the 3 or 4 that we really had the most concerns voiced about. The Office of Grants and Accountability, this is a position that is entirely grant funded, as are the positions that you will find in here listed on your page, the executive director and the 4 director positions. I want to point out again, net zero cost in doing this, and we have worked with SED over the course of several months in creating this department. Part of their concerns with us over the last couple of years were our management of grant funding, and that our grant funds needed to more closely align to district goals, in particular goals for our accountability schools. So this was a move supported by SED, and they helped us create this structure moving forward. So we would ask for you to support that position as well. The next position is the Executive Director of School and Program Efficiencies. We really believe this position is crucial for the organization of our registrars and master scheduling. So we have moved back away from school-based registrars to a central-based registration system. This position not only oversees those registrars, but also assist us in our master scheduling. I would point out some of those changes that we made to be able to recoup some money on coming up with common bell schedules. This program is a really crucial part of doing that work to align our school buildings to be able to reach those savings. This position will entail the elimination of 3 other positions, including the Director of School and Program Efficiencies, but also 2 registrar positions. This position will oversee for 2021 the Director of Student Equity and Placement, as well as the Director of Transition Systems and Language Assessment, as well as the 11 registrars that we will have remaining for 2021. And most importantly, I think for the budget discussion, this actually results in a budget reduction at the end. We are reducing the director position, moving the director into executive, but we're also reducing 2 registrars as part of the process. Office of School Innovation, we did hear that there were concerns about this. And so we want to just make sure that we understand Executive Director of School Improvement is in the budget. We will not be moving that position to Office of School Innovation or Executive Director for School Innovation. Our recommendation at this point is to keep the original title and make no changes from the 1920 budget. And the last position I want to talk about, there were some questions that have been raised over the last few weeks about Chief Technology Officer. And we are recommending that this stay in the Executive Cabinet as an SEG position. Technology is one of those overarching areas that is incorporated into all areas of the Superintendent's Cabinet. And it's essential that as we make decisions about programs and services and delivery models, that the Chief of Technology is able to coordinate and be part of the decision-making at the most basic level in those conversations with admin. So we really feel it's very important to have this position. The Chief Technology Officer is actually a combination of 2 positions, Executive Director of Instructional Technology and Information Technology Officer. It is not a new position for 2021, but this position has been in existence and filled since November of 2019. So again, we would ask for your support for that position as part of these overall changes that we're proposing. There's no other questions on that right now, and I'm sure you will after we get done with this. I just wanted to cover a topic that I know has come up, and just to give you an update on where we are with our grading and course completion as part of our COVID. And if you can go Let me go one more, and I don't want to jump around. There you go. Thank you. We'll go back to the other slide. So we are mailing our report cards out for the third marking period this week. I had given an update a couple of weeks ago on where we were with COVID and our compact for continuity of instruction. But I know questions lingered about the fourth marking period. So we have had a team together, an interdisciplinary team, looking at the fourth marking period and final course completion. So the guidelines that we will be issuing later this week, I want to just cover briefly. So for the fourth marking period and for final course completion, for K-5 students, students will receive either a pass or a not applicable, NA. 6-12 students will either receive a pass with distinction, PD, if that's basically is a grade equivalent of 85 or higher. They will either receive that or a pass, which is the grade equivalent of a 65 to 84, or they will receive an incomplete. We are rolling out new learning. It's part of the fourth marking period and what we are trying to accomplish during the fourth marking period. So our efforts with families and students has really been ratcheted up, and we've been trying to communicate that with our families via our teachers and our district-wide communication. But I want to stress that from this point forward, opportunities will exist and support will be provided for students to provide makeup work, and that's going to continue through the rest of this year and into the summer to make sure that our students are successful. Teachers are assessing student learning. They are assessing how students are able to master new concepts. They're tracking that information as they track their progress and contact with students so that we can make sure that they actually are meeting the course requirements and competencies. And as we sit right now, while we're trying to get this budget done, as soon as it's done, an interdisciplinary team will begin working on the reopening plan for our school to make sure that we have a safe return when we actually go back to a live setting. So lots of work still going on, but we wanted to make sure that you understood where we were with the fourth marking period as well as our final course completion for the school year. And then can I go back to just one update, back to that previous slide that we went by right before the COVID update? It was on the resolution 822. In our board leadership discussions, we had had some conversations about resolution 822 that the board had adopted with regard to open contracts and our progress towards finding what contracts we would be able to terminate and not pay out through the remainder of the year. So I wanted to give you a brief update today and give you our plan for moving forward and the additional things that we would be doing. We did a few weeks ago identify all open contracts, and they are currently being evaluated by the person that was responsible for sending those contracts to the law office for review. Our largest contracts that are being negotiated as we speak are with regard to transportation, TESS, or our temporary staffing agency, and our direct student service contracts. As we sit right here, I'm estimating there's probably 400 contracts that are currently being reviewed. Accounts payable has that list of open contracts that was provided by our law office. No payments will be made from accounts payable unless they are approved by the contract requester first. And that has to ensure that services have indeed been provided under those contracts before they will be paid. The board has asked as part of resolution 822 that by May 15th, you will be provided with a full update on our contract status for all open contracts. And we will indeed do that by May 15th, if not earlier. I do want to point out as part of this that lease agreements have been reviewed, and according to what the advice has been from law office, lease agreements will continue to be paid through the end of this school year. Does anybody have any questions on any of these resolutions, in particular this one, 822, or my COVID update?
So I do have a clarifying question on the resolution. My understanding was it was also a request, and President White can jump in because he wrote the resolution, a cost analysis of what savings have been realized by May 15th. But President White's, I don't know if I can see Van on here. President White, can you clarify? I know that you wrote the resolution, but my understanding was that you wanted to understand what savings were realized by May 15th or potential savings. Was that correct? Okay. Van, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was just texting Marisol and telling her my internet connection is very bad today. It's coming in and out. I'm not sure what's wrong. So if you asked me a question, I probably missed it. Sorry about
I
that.
did ask you a question in terms of
going again?
resolution 822 that they just mentioned. She specifically stated open contract language, and my understanding was you wanted a cost analysis of what savings were going to be realized by May 15th because of school closures and COVID-19. Was I correct or incorrect? I know you wrote the resolution, so I'm just asking you for clarity around it.
We will have
Yeah.
those May 15th.
Go ahead, Linda.
We will have those savings by May 15th in our final report.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes,
Can
we
you hear
can.
me?
Yes. But now you froze. Does anybody else have any other questions? Let me see. Okay. So no questions, no further questions, Linda. So I'm going to open it back to deliberations on section 6, and I know you presented some additional changes that potentially are related to section 6. So when I get to my questions, I'll ask specific questions to section 6, but also I did get Anne-Marie's memo and read it today. So I do have some questions around that. And you presented some of that information through the presentation. So Commissioner Powell, you're up first.
Okay, thank you. My questions are around the capital improvement project. So I assume you're going section by section. So I don't have any questions for the opening section. I just want to thank Linda and her team for being just about as responsive as anyone can hope for them to be to the concerns with so many different amended proposals. I don't want to say confused, but it's very difficult to see how the pieces fit together anymore. Only when, because you've told us that the changes you're pitching are cost neutral. That's the only, I have to take your word for it, right? It's so fragmented at this point. But I do appreciate how responsive you have been to the priorities of the board. I'm really, really impressed with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Adams?
I'm good.
Okay. I believe Commissioner Malloy, you were next.
Okay, great, thank you. So most of my questions I think were answered just in your updates that you've been providing. But I am trying to make a comparison of our overall cuts made at central office versus our other areas. I know in the original series of cuts in that first budget proposal, it was 2.8 million or a reduction of about 2.57%. In the revised budget proposal, those cuts increased to 3.5 million. So could you maybe give me an update, and you probably don't have this in front of you now, and this is more for Deputy Quick. What is the overall number or percentage following the most recent revisions or modifications? And what percentage of our budget cuts does this represent? Does anyone have like a rough estimate?
I can give you I don't think I can give you the percentage, Commissioner Malloy, but I can give you an approximate. So we were at 3.5 million. We have restored two directors as part of the multilingual and the arts. That total is about 140,000, and then another 30,000 for student support services. So 3.5 million minus 170,000 is about where we are right now. I don't know that percentage, however.
Okay, so maybe that can be something just for the question log.
Yes.
If possible. Great, thank you. And then just secondly, I wasn't really sure if this fell under section 6 or another section, but I'm trying to figure out the percentage of our overall budget that is going towards charter school tuition, because I did see a line in section 6 for charter schools. I thought it was around 20%. I know in Buffalo that number is increasing, and it's about like 27%. Does anyone know that percentage?
Sure, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin.
I just had to find the right page.
Great.
It's just over 10%, Commissioner.
So it isn't 20% of our budget, it's 10% of our budget.
Charter school tuition, it's roughly 100 million out of our budget's down to about 934 million.
Okay.
That's just shy over 10%.
Okay. And have we considered, just as a board, because obviously I'm relatively new, have we ever tried to write any type of letter as like a moratorium on any new, to the state for any new charter schools? Anyone have access to that?
That's nice.
I can tell you, I don't recall us doing that. I mean, people have spoken out against the expansion, but it's like a fast-moving train, and those people in Albany and the lobbyists that support that move very quick. Last time it was updated was about a couple of years ago, but no, we haven't sent any letter. We could.
Okay, yeah, I've been in contact with some board members in Buffalo, and they had reached out because they'd like to perhaps work with our board to have some sort of joint letter as Big Five districts to perhaps encourage a moratorium in upstate New York. So.
If I could just lend my conversation to that, I think that doing that would limit the choices for our parents in our community. Because if the Rochester City School District of Buffalo is not providing a quality education, our parents should have an opportunity to have some other educational opportunity. And so I would be cautious of that, because it could backfire on us without us being able to give choice when we're not doing as a district what we need to be doing. Now, having said that, it seems as if that, scores are increasing with regard to graduation rate. However, I would think that because I am a citizen of this community, that if the Rochester City School District is not doing the job it's supposed to be doing, then our parents have a right to make some other choices for their children.
I don't think anyone's questioning that, Cynthia, so I understand that sentiment. But we do know our district is hemorrhaging, and just continuous hemorrhaging, it's only getting worse. And so that is a huge percentage of our budget. So I don't.
You got to provide a quality education. Okay.
And that's our goal as
all right.
School representatives.
Yeah. Quality education, then they'll come back.
Right. I think those are all the questions I had for section 6.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Up next is President White.
Yep. I want to apologize. Something was going on with my internet, and obviously I was breaking up. So if you have a question about that resolution, I can answer it later. But I did want to reiterate, I think what Commissioner Powell said, and I'm sure what my other colleagues are thinking. Triple thanks, quadruple thanks to Deputy Superintendent Quick for working diligently, and the staff, for colleagues there, to modifications in the proposal. I do disagree. It's all about observation. A little bit with Commissioner Powell. When you have this many important modifications, I think her observation that it seems to be a bit. It doesn't seem to have a connectedness now, because we've been speaking about important initiatives that in isolation don't draw together. I think there is an opportunity, though, at our next meeting and the week that follows, when we have to submit this budget, for all these changes, if the board approves it, to come together as one comprehensive document. And I think it will all make sense. But I think the reason for the disconnectedness, if you will, is because board members were rightly identifying different issues that had to be addressed. And Chairperson Beatrice, let me just say that the effort that they have put together to make this thing make sense is really evident and very responsive to some of the things that people in the community were saying. For example, I'm thinking about all those emails that we've been getting. It's a laundry list of disparate things that the community wanted us to address. They wanted more central office cuts. How many of you have gotten an email about that? And the board members wanted more central office cuts. Linda Quick and her team produced those cuts that weren't there before. They wanted special ed restoration. You guys have gotten those emails too. I mean, they're coming hot and heavy. Last night, in the middle of the night, I was getting emails about special ed restoration. Some people saying, we recognize what you've done, but we want you to do more. They did special ed restoration at the call response to the board and the community. They re-emphasized the role of student support services. That was a modification I hope people recognize that they made today. That was an important one. There was the adoption of the pre-K initiative. That was huge. I was in a meeting with a Zoom meeting with 80 residents. Many teachers were saying, hey, what happened with the pre-K initiative? And I thought you supported Terry Date's approach. And I did. But, you know, when you're trying to put together a budget that is important as this, that has so many different tentacles, if you will, you have to make some concessions. And I was willing to make that concession, because when you make that kind of concession or you make that kind of compromise, you have to think, is it going to hurt people? We have quality pre-K centers by CBOs that provide good, reliable, effective services to our children. So I don't feel like instead of having two, we have one, that we're throwing our kids to the wolves. Our CBOs do a good job. That was never a question. Now, there are some that maybe aren't as effective as others, but this is never a question. You reach this kind of compromise that Linda and the board reached. It's not a compromise that would affect the education and safety of children. They will go, some 200 something children, instead of going into that second CBO site, they will go into a second district site. They will go into CBO sites throughout the community that are safe and effective pre-K centers for our children. They obviously understood and heard the call about bilingual education and the need to sort of up our game there. It's clear we are not servicing that community in an effective way. Now, the solution that they came up with is 2 directors. I think that is, I know some people wanted some other solutions, but at least that solution addresses, with our limited resources, the need to improve the services that we offer to those. It hasn't been discussed today, but there was a concern about RIA. That too was addressed, not as effectively as we wanted it to be, but our hands were sort of tied there. And I know Commissioner LeBron, you're going to get to that later on. And finally, I just really want to emphasize, I hope people realize that this is the road of compromise that I spoke to earlier on, and we wouldn't have gotten here without Linda and her team. And again, it's not perfect. As my grandfather was involved in the civil rights movement used to say, it's not where we want to be, but thank God it is not where we were. We are miles ahead of where, and I hope people appreciate their effort, and that appreciation is reflected in eventually their vote. Thank you. And I don't have any questions.
All right. Thank you, President White. Vice President, Commissioner Elliott.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I too want to add my thanks to Commissioner Powell and President White with the work that the district staff has done on this. This is a tough board, and to be able to work as respectfully and elegantly as you all have done, and to present such a calming position has been quite gratifying. And so I just want to thank you all for that. But I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Shepard.
My questions for these sections I previously submitted and they were answered, so I don't have any today. I do have a follow-up question that doesn't necessarily have to do with these sections specifically, so I can wait till later in the meeting after we get through this.
Okay. Well, that leaves me, and unfortunately, I have a different perspective than what was shared from my colleagues. So I prepared some questions specifically around Section 6, which was the area that I probably had the most issues with. So let me just also point out, I did read the memo. I want to address a few things from that memo as well. But I do want to have an understanding. If you go to section 6 and you start at page 5, I wanted to understand what on page 5, what other variable expenditure is included. So I'm going to go to that page as well, and I will point it out. Right under salary compensation, if you go down right before totals, there is a line there for $236,000, and I just wanted to understand what specifically that expenditure is.
Beatrice, what page in the budget or the memo are you talking about?
Section, well, I'm on section 6, page 5.
Page 5, thank you.
Yes. So I do have page numbers. I apologize if you didn't hear it or missed it. Please stop me and I'll make sure that we put it up. So right under, on top of totals, it says other variable expenses. There was a little over $300,000 there. That line is being cut by 23%, but I don't understand what that actually means for
Commissioner.
expenditures.
Sure, Commissioner. We lump a whole host of expenses as other variable. It would include our professional and technical service contracts, agency temporary staff. We include as a negative expense the department credits. There was a question in round 3 about what department credits are. Our professional development expenses are in there. Our BOCES payments, which would be for BOCES tuition or nursing services. And then a couple other miscellaneous items like judgments and claims. We can give
So
you.
it's under the board. It's Bob. It's under the board. I don't know if we would have any BOCES expenditures under the board budget for that line.
Oh, you know what? I gave you the whole gamut of what would constitute. Let me.
I just meant for us, what that means for us.
For Board of Education, you can find the detail on page 7, just 2 pages later.
Okay.
The largest expense of other variable would include your contracts, professional service contracts, temporary staff, professional development, and then miscellaneous services. And if you'd like the detail of the $70,375 in miscellaneous, we can provide that for you.
Yeah, can you provide that in writing? I'll have my result put that one down. I would like to understand that one a little bit further.
No problem.
If you go to page 13 next, on page 13, this is under Chief of Staff Management, Financial Discussion and Analysis. There is a 49.49% increase there on the first line for salary compensation. And I just wanted to understand that increase there.
Primarily, Commissioner, that is the result of shifting a number of positions to the Chief of Staff's office. I believe primarily it's our central registrars. Brian Pack is on the line. He can correct me if I'm mistaken about that, but there were positions already budgeted within the school district that have shifted from other areas to the Chief of Staff. And I see a lot of them, student equity and placement. I'm seeing that on page 16.
That's correct. It's student equity and placement under the centralized registrar. It was in the memo that I emailed earlier today, and also in Linda's presentation. It's part of the reorg, and it's the shift. So under that position, the executive director position that the registrars will fall under, the student equity and placement office will also fall under that executive director, which was moved to the chief of staff. At the end result, it's actually a reduction in the budget. It's really just a shift from different parts of the organization.
Okay. So that does bring, I do want to understand why there are teachers listed on page 14 under the chief of staff. If you want to answer that one before I move to page 15.
Registrars are teachers. They are teachers. So those are the teachers that you see.
So the registrars are teachers. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. Which brings me to the next point. I do know that there is a new FTE. I hear what you guys are saying, and Linda just actually explained. Let me see, I have multiple notes everywhere around this, that there would be 2 registrars actually eliminated and a director position in order to create this executive director position, which for me is problematic. And I'll say this for myself, because we're eliminating people who are going to be actually directly doing the work to then potentially promote someone. But the other concern that I have is I wanted to understand the salary difference. And I guess there has to be a salary difference from the person's going from a director title to an executive director title. And I understand that you guys are saying that it's net zero expenditures because you're eliminating 3 positions in order to create this 1 position. But I would like to know specifically what the salary difference is for this director moving into an executive director.
It's a 5% increase from her existing salary. And then there's the elimination of the 2 registrars. So it's just the standard increase per ASAR from one bracket to the next. So from director to executive director, it's 5%.
But do you recognize that that is an actual promotion for an individual when we historically have the worst deficit we've ever faced? And the other piece I do want to point out is that that position would actually be a position that's that has credentials, and people who are not credentialed cannot supervise people with credentials. And so I do want to have a conversation about that tonight in executive session with more details, because that's a problem, because right now that position is slated to be under the chief of staff, and our chief of staff is not a credentialed staff. So that is a problem that is against the law, and the board should not be approving that. I do want to talk about understanding why the chief of communications and the communications department itself is listed under the chief of staff as well. And what was the rationale for having a chief report to another chief?
So the chief of communications has actually, as long as I can remember, has been under the chief of staff for as many different iterations of the organization as I can remember. So that is not a change. That was already there.
So you're saying the chief, we've always had a chief of staff reporting, a chief reporting to another chief.
That's correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I apologize. My internet is unstable again, but.
No, I said that was correct. Yes.
Okay. And then on page, let's see here. I was a little confused on page 20 where the chief academic officer line showed a reduction of 2.40 when this is the chief of staff, the chief academic officer, I apologize, chief academic officer line. But I think based on some of the answers you guys just provided is that this was a shift for certain individuals under the new title. I was just confused reading that. It's on page 20 on section 6.
Yes.
It said chief academic officer, and it starts off with a 2018-2019 actual number, but then we didn't have that position in 2018-2019.
So I
don't know how that's reflected in that regard. I just don't think it's reflecting accurately.
Well, so, and this is, I learned this budget book myself and how it works. So what you see under deputy, starting on page 17, so 17 through all the way up to page 24 is everything that's under me, which is everything from page 25 to the end of the book. So the first 5 or 6 pages are a summary of what you see in the rest of the section. So the chief academic officer section, which is pages 25 through 30, has a net reduction of the 2.4. And that's because even though we added a chief academic officer, we've made several other reductions of T&L staff, teaching and learning staff, in here. And that's why that reduction was actually in that 2.4. And it's actually greater than that now because of the coaches, the instructional coaches that we reduced that also had fallen under there. So that's gone from 14 to 7. So the actual net reduction at the end under Chief Academic Officer will go down by another 7 people.
Okay,
So
thank
the span of the deputy, just to clarify, Commissioners, the span of the deputy superintendent is actually a little more expansive than that. There are specific programmatic areas that the deputy superintendent has, I'll call it direct supervision of, but then there are other departments and areas that the deputy superintendent, it's not direct supervision, but it's more administrative control or organizational management control. And that would extend out through page 76 of the budget book.
And actually, so the schools are listed separately. So technically the schools are under me as well, but those are separately budgeted. But these are, as we said, the direct reports that are falling under me, with the exception of HR and finance, which are at the end. Yes, thank you, Bob, for clarifying. It actually ends on page 76.
Okay, thank you guys. On page 24, I know that this was also part of your presentation. I did, and I wrote my own notes so I don't forget. So it shows a new title of Executive Director of School Improvement under Expanded Learning, which I had questions around. Expanded Learning was also one of the first areas cut. I did try to fight against that, but that was one of the first areas cut when we first discovered the deficit. But it also shows an executive director cut of school innovation in order to create the new title of executive director of school improvement. So I wanted to understand why this position is being renamed and potentially reclassified. And then I also would like to discuss if this is being done because the credentials of a certain employee have not been obtained in the allotted time frame. And I would like to have that discussion tonight in executive session. And I wholeheartedly feel that the board should not be approving this in order to restart the time frame of any individual who has exceeded their time to get their credentials. So I definitely want to have that conversation tonight in executive session as well.
It was stricken.
Part of what we've talked about is actually not making the change. It has nothing to do with anything about credentials because the person does have them, but it does have to do with what I think originally was proposed in the budget by Superintendent Dade was to more align to what the work should be called. It was more of a renaming as opposed to anything other than that. So like I said, I think he felt that school improvement more aptly described the work than school innovation, but we have said as part of this proposal that we don't need to make that title change. We can leave it school innovation.
Is the same individual in that position, the one whose credential time is up? So I do recognize that today was put into the system to give her a different track. However, this board has given this individual 5 years to meet those credentials and they have not done it. And so I would like to have that discussion further in executive session. We should not be approving those types of changes when this board has given the individual ample time to meet the credentials.
Chairperson LeBron?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know I did have the opportunity to speak to some colleagues about it. That matter will be heard, that issue will be heard in executive session. There are some details that the staff have provided to me that may change you or some of our colleagues' minds about the status of that particular person. I don't think what we know about that particular person is accurate in terms of the state's understanding of what this person can and cannot do. But again, anticipating that it was going to be an issue, staff agreed. We'll have our HR director there and they will address that issue in executive session.
Yeah, so
Point of order, point of order. I feel that this whole discussion is going too deeply into the details, given the personnel nature. If we're already agreed that we're going into an executive session, I really please ask that we stop having this conversation at this level of detail now and hold that space for executive session.
Commissioner Powell, the only reason why I interjected is I did not want people to leave with the impression that this person was not qualified, that there is another side to this. So I agree with you. We should go no further, but I did not want to leave it that way. I think Deputy Superintendent did indicate that the person was qualified, but I did want to just bring some balance because I don't want to just leave it in the public sphere that there was just sort of one side to it. But you're right. Let's talk about an executive session.
Yeah, I was done. I didn't need anybody else to interject on that. But I do want to go back to where I was at. So page 29, I see that the director of ESSO position was a position that was being eliminated this year. And I see that in your presentation, you are asking for that position then to not be eliminated, but still eliminating the executive director of MLL. I just want to point out for the record, I'm not supporting that. I am going to support that we still have an executive director and director. The justification of not having or eliminating executive director and directors is just not being done across the entire central office. And that's still evident in the budget book and in your presentations around grants, which I will get to. I did ask our Auditor General to do some information finding and fact finding for me last night. Because I needed to understand if that position actually had any funding. I do recognize that the position was vacant. It originally had some budget, but that budget was taken part of the sweep when we discovered the deficit. So technically it has no funding right now. So I just want to put this out there for my colleagues. If you guys move forward and vote yes on the budget, you have every right to do so if you are satisfied with what has been presented, but I will not be supporting that position. And I will support my community who's asking to keep an executive director of multilingual and foreign studies and have a director of bilingual education. And so I'm going to move forward and keep going down my points. I wanted to understand on page 30 what the Office of Culturally and Linguistics response was. I was not familiar with that department at all and what their responsibilities would be. That is on page 30, section 6.
So if I can point out that that position was going to be created in our last budget presentation last week, we have not gone that direction, and we have cut that and restored the Director of African American Studies once again.
Okay, thank you. So in specifically to talk about the grants, I wanted to understand the titles that the people in the grants office currently have. I saw the justification for those positions, but who's in the grants office? Who's been managing this $150 million is what I want to understand that first.
Well, I think Anne-Marie can help me with some of the details, and Bob as well. They have not been in a department. They have been under other departments and spread out, and it's not been a coordinated effort to manage our grants and align them so that they all collectively support the goals of the organization, especially those that are required for title funds 1, 2, 3, and 4, which really support our program schools, our ESSA requirements, and the work that we really need to be doing according to the state and federal government. So this is really pulling them together to manage them as a department. So we coordinate across the titles. We're spending our money appropriately as allowed by the title funds and the guidelines that control that. But it really is putting them under their own umbrella to adequately support everybody.
Yeah, but what are their current titles right now?
Do we have all those, Anne-Marie, that we can list?
So there are actually various titles. They're actually the responsibility for some of the title grants fell in the teaching and learning division, and some of the existing directors were supporting those grants. So there was no cohesive grants department. So I think 2 of the title grants were, maybe even actually 3, were in the teaching and learning division amongst different people that worked there. It was just part of their job. They were directors. I believe the executive director of professional learning had one of the grants that she managed. Director of, I believe, African American Studies had another. I believe he managed Title IV. So Title I was managed in the Office of School Innovation, but there was no cohesiveness to how we used our grant dollars. And quite frankly, we sent a lot of the dollars back. Unfortunately, it went unspent. So we were not maximizing our grants. And that was something that the former commissioner actually brought to us when she came and visited. It was Commissioner Ilya when she visited her just prior to her departure. when she came and spent the day with her team and they reviewed kind of our current state overall. And that was something that she focused on, and she said, you guys have to do better. And she asked that we meet with her grants department, and so we did. And so this is the result of that. We had worked with them in the design of an organization, but we did take pieces of positions, kind of put them together. It is not an increase overall. It's a 1.25 of that entire department is funded through general funds, and that came from parts of existing positions in general fund that were retitled. So we can give you the detail of that if that's what you would like. I don't have that all memorized, but yes.
I would like the details, and I also would like to understand how many of them are actual grant writers.
There are 2 grant writers.
And what are their titles?
I believe it's not a title. It doesn't have the actual title of grant writer. It's a civil service title. I know the person's name, but I can't.
Specialist.
You know what it is, Bob?
I want to say one is administrative specialist.
One was administrative specialist, that's right. And then there was another, but they were not in the same title. And actually one of those administrative specialists has been reduced. So there will be 1 remaining grant writer.
So we're going to create an entire grants department of an executive director, multiple directors, but only have 1 actual grant writer, and neither of those, that 1 individual will not have a director and executive director title. That's the plan?
Yes, we can give you more details.
Yeah, I would like to understand that one a little bit more. And I guess I'm going to keep moving because I have a few more, and then I do want to talk about the memo that was sent today. On page 43, there are some additions in the print shop and also FTE additions in the business system department, and student information systems also experienced some additional FTEs. Can you explain those 3 on page 43, those 3 lines and areas?
Those are primarily the result of shifting staff from one functional unit to another.
Salary-wise, is the same. They're just moving, but keeping the same salary, just different titles?
Overall, the salary is slightly reduced from where it was. The area in total actually reduced its FTE count 2.0 positions.
Actually, it showed a 2.80 increase for one of them. In the print shop, it shows from 6 positions to 8.80.
Those are changes within the smaller functional units of information management and technology. If you look at information management and technology in totality, the entire department reduced its headcount by 2 FTEs. But you are correct. There were some shifts of staff between functional units, and that's why you see numbers on this particular page 43 go up or down, depending on which unit you're looking at.
So page 40,
go ahead.
Reductions. Commissioner LeBron, if you go to page 40, it shows the net of the overall reductions between pages 41 and 44. To Bob's point, there's actually 2 FTEs reduced overall. And you would have to go through pages 41 through 44 to see where those total 2 FTEs are coming from. But part of it is the shift within that department. So you might see an increase somewhere else, but you see a net decrease in the overall department.
I did highlight that on page 44, but I was a little confused as to why there were increases, under the print shop. I did see 2 FTE reductions in business analytics, but then information technology is exactly the same. I see 2 increase in the print shop, and so there was 2 decrease up top and 2 increase right here in the print shop. And then there's an additional addition in business systems and analytics. It went from 9 to 11 FTEs. I was unclear how we got back to 2 overall reductions in the total, if I take into account all the sections starting from page 43 to 44.
Well, most of them are at the top, and you see 5.8 reductions right in the very top of page 43.
Yeah, right at the top, there are 2 Oh, you guys are eliminating that database administrative department?
Those 5-point FTEs, the database,
Yeah.
the senior database administrator and the senior information business administrator or business analysis. Yes, those are 5.8.
So those are the individuals being reshifted amongst those other departments here?
That is correct.
Okay. So this is the reshift.
And the print shop actually remained flat at 4 FTEs. I'm wondering if there was a formatting change in the budget book, because I've noticed several occasions in these conversations over the past month where the question seems to believe that the totals are at the top of the section when in fact they're at the bottom of the section. So maybe there's a formatting change.
Yeah. I did have on page 72, and I'm almost done, you guys. Page 72 of this section. I'm going to go to it, and hopefully Kelly can put it up. This was a little odd for me. On page 72, there is a representation of a 0.25% reduction in FTE. And then on page 21 of this same section, there's a reduction on the budget for $25 in facilities. And I just needed to understand if those are related and what those are. They're just odd numbers that stuck out for me.
They are not related because on page 72, what you're looking at is actual FTEs. So it just so happens that it's $25 in the on page 21, but I think that's by happenstance as much as anything.
It is coincidental.
Yes.
Okay.
On page 70 actually showed the $25.
Okay, page 70 shows the $25?
0.25 FTE.
Or 0.25.
Yeah, 0.25 FTE.
It caused me to buy so much lunch that I have to, we had to account for it in the budget. The $25.
I was like, Mike, you could put $25 out your pocket into that budget. I just want to tell you that.
Whatever you need to do.
You didn't have to make that cut. But page 75, I just want to clarify that professional technical services, this is the SRO contract currently.
It would be included in there. It is
Okay.
not the totality of the contract.
So that's not the total of it?
Commissioner, we can get you that detail, but I believe there are 1 or 2 other or 3 other contracts in that line, but I'll clarify that for you.
Okay, please do. Thank you. Page 81, I see 5 FTEs that are also in accounting. Just wanted to understand those positions as well.
So within the finance department, just a bit of a restructure organizationally, and that primarily is taking our current payroll unit and our current accounts payable unit to form a combined office of the controller who will oversee and manage all the district's expenditures, whether it's a payroll expenditure, a vendor expenditure, or an employee reimbursement like mileage. So this is primarily the result of shifting of staff within the functional units of finance.
But are 5 new FTEs being created with the reshift?
No, Commissioner. There are no new creates out of the blue. There is a new title, controller. And the new title, the new position of controller was combined from the elimination of our accounts payable supervisor and our payroll supervisor. And these other increases you see are simply shifts between the functional units of finance.
So they'll be removed from one department, combined with the other, and the 2 eliminations to create the controller's title.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So there is a net reduction in the finance department overall of 1 FTEs, which reflects on the bottom of, or on the back of page 82, from 56 to 55.
And that's what the 1 FTE is, the creation of the controller position, controller.
There's actually a couple. Overall, is a department reducing one FTE from 56 to 55, but within that are a multitude of functional units. To your point, we did get rid of 2 positions, 2 previous supervisor positions to create the controller. You will also see on here, we are merging our Department of Financial Management, although I call it the Office of Financial Management, is being eliminated, and we're merging that into our Office of Budget and Revenue. The former Department of Financial Management was comprised of a director and several budget analysts. We are combining all the budget analysts within the budget office, and we are basically downgrading the director of financial management to budget analyst to provide another line staff position.
Great, thank you. And then I just wanted to bring up, I know I mentioned you guys had mentioned SEG and the BEG group also potentially doing furloughs and salary freezes so that we don't get an increase, which I fully support. I did ask for a list of how many current employees we have right now that are active exempt employees. And there are about 35 employees who would also be able to be furloughed or no increases in raises this year. And I would like to talk to the board about that in executive session, primarily so that I can name names and salary amounts. So that the board is fully aware that this is another way that we can also potentially have some cost savings, and fully support that we're going to do it, and BG and SEG, our non-exempt employees should as well, or exempt ones. And then finally on the memo, and you just presented about it, and keeping the chief of IT, you're going to want to pull that up. I don't know if Kalia or Marisol are running it, but Linda, your presentation today, in the memo, what was cited for justification was also an audit that Roosevelt School District went through. And so I pulled up the Roosevelt audit right before the meeting today, read it, reached out to the state auditor as well, just for some clarity. I also know a board member at Roosevelt District. So Roosevelt is the district, for those who don't know, was one of the experimental districts that the state of New York had state control over for 11 years and was not successful in that. But in the audit, they were cited for not having a chief of IT, but they were also cited because they really had 3 team senior members, a lead IT specialist, a coordinator of instructional technology, and an assistant superintendent of schools that was overseeing the IT department. And that is vastly different from what this district has in terms of leadership and management in the IT department. We don't have 3 random senior level staff supervising the IT department. We in fact had a supervisor, so the person who's the chief now was in that role before. So I am not going to be supporting that position specifically based on information from other big city school districts and other reports. We're in a deficit, and this is not the time in my position for us to continue with a position that I know you guys are saying is not new, but that position actually was presented to the board in October 2019, right before a massive amount of mid-year layoffs. We promoted someone. And in hindsight, you know, it's not something I would have supported, a promotion, and a month later doing the largest reduction mid-year we have ever faced in history. So I will gladly share that audit with my board colleagues if you're interested in reviewing it. There were a number of things. They didn't have a disaster recovery plan. They didn't have IT security awareness training. They had some service agreements that were inadequate and not clear with BOCES, and a number of other compliancy issues within the IT department, including not following their own IT policies. They weren't even following their policies. So I also want to point out,
Beatrice, are you talking about Roosevelt or ourselves?
Roosevelt, not us. Let me be very clear. This was the audit from Roosevelt. Our audit actually has never our auditors have cited us for many things. IT has not been one of the departments that we have been cited for. We have enough things that we've been cited for. So thank you for that clarification. I'm still talking about the Roosevelt audit. And I also want to just point out that accountability on some of these things were mentioned, but we just eliminated a chief of accountability. So I thought that was a little bit ironic to mention accountability as a factor to keep a position when we just eliminated the chief of accountability. So I will, in the executive session tonight, want to specifically address those couple of issues I mentioned and the 35 active exempt employees. And that's all I have for section 6. So I'm going to move on to section 8.
Actually, Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes?
I have a follow-up question about section 6 that I forgot to ask. Is there any way that I could ask that now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. On page 83, which is the Human Resources Management page, I just needed a little more explanation on, it looks like in the 1920 budget, it was budgeted at $7.8 million roughly, but then there's an increase in this budget to a little over $10 million. Can someone just explain that increase?
Yes, Commissioner, I can take that on.
Thank you.
Overwhelmingly, what you see in there is related to salaries. The current fiscal year 2019-20 budget, I believe this board knows we have a significant budget for, I'll call it a negative budget for salaries, position vacancies, and position turnover. We centrally budget that in this book, and then throughout the year may transfer appropriations to match ongoing expenditures. We've actually, again, I believe this board knows the budgeted cost for substitute teachers was incredibly low for the current year, and the negative budget for vacancy turnover was incredibly high. We are right-sizing those two lines, and that's going to generate some significant swings in this year's budget. I will also throw on, to a smaller extent, that this board incurred expenses for the superintendent search last year. That was, I forget the dollar amount, but it was a one-time cost that this board will not see. And then finally, I will throw on that there is roughly $1.92 million of retro pay that appeared in a prior budget. That was also one time.
Okay, so it's primarily substitute costs or a proposed or a potential increase in those sub costs, would you say, makes up the majority of that 2.5 or 2.2 million?
Commissioner, even though I gave you a long-winded answer, the majority would be in the substitute.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. The next section is actually section 8, and I don't know if anyone has questions on section 8, which is district-wide profiles and budgets. It's a much shorter overall view of total costs and expenditures.
If you're looking for a response to that, no, I don't. And like Commissioner Shepard said earlier on, that I, and along with my colleagues, submitted lots and lots and lots of questions, and I want to thank the administration. Those questions were submitted in advance, very detailed questions and detailed responses. So I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Van. I don't think anyone has any questions specifically on section 8. I don't either. And the next section is capital 9, which is the capital improvement plan. We did receive that last week, and hopefully went on board docs right away as well. And I know that Commissioner Powell has questions, so I'm going to turn it over to her right now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I muted myself, but I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Starting on page 11, there's a table that essentially moves each grade level forward a year of their cohort. And that table got really weird at grade 9 and then again at the 12th grade year. And if someone could explain that, and then I have a follow-up comment or question. That's it.
Yeah, Linda, I can take that if you'd like me to. All right. So the several pieces of data, but first of all, good afternoon, Commissioners, Vice President Elliott, President White. The chart that you see on page 11 of the CIP, the CIP takes in data from a variety of offices across the district. And this chart came from, or this information came from Chief Giamartino and the Accountability Office. And the main reason why these numbers fluctuate, especially at 9th grade, is because it's actually based more on the 9 go 10, 10 go 11, 11 go 12. So we do have some students that take a little bit more time to get from the grade 9 to grade 10. So that shows that that anomaly there in that percentage. And then also with the senior part of it, it's all part of kind of right sizing themselves back. So if you notice, it falls more in line with our 7th and 8th grade numbers as it project back to their senior year. So really the anomaly falls into that 9, 10, and 11 area where you see the numbers drop and then come back to our more balanced number compared with the other grade levels.
Right. So, and that's the answer I anticipated. But my concern is that what is the utility of this chart? If the utility of the chart is such so that we can set aside the appropriate number of classrooms and FTEs for each grade level, then it seems to me that that you simply account for it by explaining how many new sections have to be opened up and in what schools to accommodate those.
Sure.
Well, they're not surges so much as
Right.
bottlenecks.
That's a great question. And it can be utilized in a variety of areas because of the way some of our buildings are organized with our 9th graders in a 9th grade academy, or the nature of what science classrooms are needed and those type of areas. It allows us to be able to get a little better perspective on what we would be planning for. And with the amount of movement recently in our buildings of either a relocation of a building or a readjustment of a high school program, like an upper and lower school model and those type of things, it just allows us to get a little bit better perspective. But as your point in saying, the numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't generally change in terms of the number of students in a high school setting, 9 through 12. It just allows us a little bit more specificity if we would need it based upon some of those nuances of a master scheduling issue.
Right. And I assumed that was the master scheduling was entirely the point of the table. And I'm just concerned that that we're not necessarily using it to full advantage if we're not ensuring that the number of seats available in each zone are fitted. Maybe one of the, I don't know, it just seems like there's very limited utility to this table as it currently exists, and that we could add some utility going forward.
I wouldn't disagree. I think it's just one piece of the puzzle that we're utilizing. In fact, our team worked directly with Ms. Orden over the past 5 or 6 weeks, and she's been incredible in terms of, as we look at possible building closures and where the students could be located in a particular zone. She's been really spot on with her assessment. So there's many other charts that go and data sets that go into those decisions. So I don't disagree with you in the sense that this probably doesn't accomplish the same level of detail that we may use we probably could use it in a different way. So we wouldn't have any problem moving it or adjusting it and taking a look at that more globally. But but in terms of, like, for example, our most recent closures, making sure we have seat availability in those different zones for those students, so we don't have to have a mass movement of kids around the area. Ms. Orden has been incredible with that effort with us.
Okay. My next question is page 16, cash capital. Obviously, this year, we're asking City Council to waive the cash capital requirement. However, your table outlines essentially the $10 million cash capital in future years. I think that's what that column is. My screen keeps jumping up. Yeah, for 21, 22, and through the next 4 years after. So can you describe to me what facilities improvement, that being the first line under cash capital, what sorts of facilities improvements would we spend potentially $6 million on that would not be eligible for CIP borrowing? That sounds like a much larger number than our local share requirements.
Well, the entire $6 million allocation that has been utilized from cash capital traditionally, in terms of the general projects, the CIP projects, excuse me, it's supplemental funds. So there's certain items that are not eligible due to our own internal ordinances with City Council. So right now it's pretty limited as to what our CIP can be used for.
Exactly.
Infrastructure, health and safety, those type of items are what we have generally used it. So if we have another project in a particular building that is, needed for the school to function more efficiently, but would not fall into that criteria, that's where we would utilize some of these funds. The project would still be aidable. It's just the funding source would be different. So that's probably the main usage. For example, refurbishing a kindergarten room would not be an eligible expense under our current CIP guidelines, not from the state, but from our dealings with City Council and the City of Rochester. So that's where that money can give us more flexibility to move forward. There's certainly many other items that come out of that allocation that are tied to the facilities program. For example, we do all of our visual inspections on buildings that are annual through that fund. We do all of our lead and water testing, which is essential through that fund. Asbestos compliance, our handicap compliance, come through that, and our building condition survey is another example. So there's numerous items that come out of that we utilize for that, out of that money. But the main facility use is to supplement what would not be approved by the city and City Council under our current ordinances.
Okay, well, that answer really points to some fundamental flaws in how we're engaging with City Hall. And for my colleagues,
would agree.
We need to have a conversation as a body, I think, to request of City Council that the $10 million cash capital requirement be removed entirely, and from like on a permanent basis. And based on what Mr. Schmidt just said, that some of the other restrictions on our capital improvement borrowing or our capital improvement plan also be revisited. That in fact, there's a good chance that we're spending money on less important things because we have to find a way to spend our cash capital set aside. And that in a perfect world, if, for instance, if we look on page 17, on page 19, you can see how cash capital is broken out to include food service expenditures, physical education equipment. So if the phys ed department were to budget $250,000 each year for that equipment directly, instead of having it sort of set aside in a cash capital venue, then our budget would be much more straightforward. We would be able to see very quickly what the ongoing expenses are for phys ed. When $250,000 a year is essentially buried in cash capital, we as decision makers have a much harder time seeing where the funds are coming from.
Commissioner, can I interject a thought? I don't want to interrupt you, that's all.
Go ahead.
So, for example, I think one thing we can certainly do is provide a thorough list of what the expenditures were out of the cash capital allocations. For example, the last several years in our physical education component, we've renovated every high school weight room here in the city. So, and we do 2 weight rooms a year or whatever it might be, and we utilize the expense for that. So it's equipment, flooring, and everything out of that. If we were, then that's just one example. In the other areas, for example, in facilities, all of our vehicle replacements, all of our snow removal equipment, items like that we would purchase would come out of our A budget. And because it's an asset, we're allowed to purchase it out of capital. And so I'll turn to Bob in terms of some of the financial aspects of it. But I do agree, if there's a concern around the transparency of what items are being purchased, we can certainly provide that on an annual basis to the board, or give them our best thinking at a particular moment. You know, that we always set aside some resources based upon, you know, our boiler issue last year at Marshall, where we had a flood in the basement and when the boilers had to be replaced. We had to take some money out of that in the short term to be able to solve that type of a problem. But overarching the general purchases in that area, all the people that work with that in that area in terms of resources would be able to provide that to be transparent. So we never want to not be show you what we're purchasing. So we would do that either way, but that's certainly something we can certainly do very quickly.
And that's what I'm saying, is that we as board members don't want to not fund important things.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, if, for example, to use your example, if the weight rooms are being reconditioned each year on a rotating basis, those allocations could just as easily be budgeted in, the phys ed department directly rather than through cash capital. And if we're using A funds to do it, which is what basic, the cash capital is an H fund, but we supply those dollars out of the A fund. So it's a wash, right? And it's more important that it's more important that each department is asking for what they need up front than that we jump through hoops to present it in a way, just in a certain way, simply because City Council wants to see it that way. The days when a cash capital was needed to pay for local share is long gone. There was a time when state reimbursement was not as generous as it was, and cash capital was the way that we ensured that we had resources to pay for local share. That is really not a driving force anymore, and we have to make it clear to City Council that the cash capital requirement is obsolete now.
Commissioner, I would jump in that I have a philosophy on capital projects, including cash capital funding. My philosophy and my strategy that I've employed over the years is to use cash capital funding to support those projects that are either somewhat low in cost, like on the scale of $1 to $250,000. Those projects that are annually recurring, very similar dollar amounts, and those projects for which are not long-lived. And I would suggest computer software and technology would fit nicely into that category as technology changes so rapidly. So there can be a good use for cash capital funding. I'm not going to disagree with your commentary around the city requirements. I do think there's a place, but this entire CIP could be done a little differently that would provide adequate information to you as individual commissioners and a collective board in how capital dollars are being spent. But I wouldn't want to just completely write off the cash capital initiative.
Well, let me say it this way. We can still have a cash capital allocation. We don't need city council to tell us to have a cash capital allocation. How's that? Okay, so I have one more point. In the past, our CIP document has contained a table that outlines which schools would be eligible for capital improvement dollars in over the next 5 years, so that you could actually see the schedule of which schools would be due for the capital improvement funding in the out years, in the 4 out years. That table is not in this document, and it's further complicated by the fact that, of course, with FMP, some of our schools got double MCA funding through the FMP. So I would respectfully request that such a table be inserted into this document before it gets advanced to City Hall. We need that picture in order to see. We don't need to know, we as the board don't need to know what exactly is going to get renovated in what the pieces of the renovations will be in 21, 22. But we need to know what schools would be in the queue for 21, 22, and so on.
That's a great question and a great point. One of the challenges, and one reason why we didn't insert it this year in our CIP is because of the numerous school closures that we have been discussing since late in the fall throughout the winter. So we just really felt like letting this budget process run its course, and then looking at our inventory going forward. And the other item that's one piece of the puzzle. And then the other item that affected it was the fact that the modernization program schools, if not approved in this session of the legislative session, would now have gone 2 years. So we would have to go back and revisit our master plan that drove that as well. So there's a couple different pieces in play, but we can certainly give you by the board meeting in June, give you a general sense of when the reset years are. Remember, we have double MCA schools that aren't even finished yet that would have a reset years that are all 10 years out because of that. But we can certainly provide that document and give you a better sense of that piece of it. Even the projects that if you've noticed, even over the last year, we've had School 44, which was, we had removed it, and now we're going to be adding it back because of our some of the decisions we made over the past several weeks. So I think it's just, it allows us we wanted to try to get a little more stability before we tried to project some of those out long term. But it's certainly very, very simple to put that together for you for certainly by your approval date in June.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Commissioner Powell, is that all?
That's it. Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Adams, I see your hand was up.
A couple weeks ago, I had proposed that we acknowledge our athletes, and we're going to do that next month. And so since we're talking about next month, I think it's important that we realize next month is how close it is, that we take a look at figuring out how we're going to have something in place for our graduates. We got to figure out something for them to be able to take a picture, to get a certificate or something for the seniors. There's a website called FACTS, F-A-C-T-S, youth program. They got suggestions. I ain't saying we need to take that suggestion, but we need to do something. We need to provide for our seniors that are getting ready to get out of this district. And I couldn't let this meeting go by without saying it, because this is next month we're talking about. This is next month. We got to do something for our seniors. Find a way for them to get their certificate and take a picture. I don't have the answer, but we need to figure it out as a board, okay? And with that, I'm clear.
Commissioner Adams, that's a great point, and our chiefs and principals are very worried about that and working on a plan for that as we speak, because they share your concern. So we'll come back to you with our ideas and thoughts about how we're going to do just that.
Thank you. Commissioner Shepard?
Yes, this is the time to go back to my follow-up question.
Yes.
So weeks ago, I know we were talking about equity across the school, which was in section 4, and I had brought up my concern about the support that we are giving to Edison High School in regards to the number of students that are enrolled there and the supports that students need at Edison. And, you know, I wasn't sure how I was going to bring it up tonight. I wanted to listen to the conversation to kind of figure out what was happening at central office and some of the things we were and weren't able to do with positions. And so tonight, I really want to put this out there. I guess I'm more so speaking to my colleagues, and hopefully the administration hears this, is that I don't want us to get looped into I guess the issues that we had with previous administration at Edison, where they didn't feel that they were supported with enough positions in certain areas, to say it like that. And my concern is that they are losing a couple of APs, which helps with a number of things in the school in regards to helping with school climate and managing some of the more tough and difficult behaviors that unfortunately sometimes kids exhibit over there. And so what I'm looking at is I went through all of the high schools and did AP to student ratio. And one of the issues with doing that is that the ratios don't really show the equity, they just show a number. So for instance, with Edison, it would say the ratio is that there's one AP to every 197 students. That's the same ratio for early college. The issue with that, though, is that Edison has about 1,500 students, and they also receive a bunch of transfers throughout the year. Early college has 395 students. So when you think about the atmosphere in the actual school building, when you have so many more students, that ratio really doesn't do it justice in regards to the supports that schools need. And I am also making the same argument for integrated arts and technology. And so what I wanted to ask from my colleagues is that before Thursday, we figure out a way to at least restore one AP position to Edison to help with the supports of that school. And that also we look into potentially adding one more AP to integrated arts and technology. These are also two schools that we are really looking to turn around. They have some of our most challenging behaviors and just require more supports. And so I'm not saying that, you know, we wouldn't take care of our students in that regard. There are also two of the schools that I think that we had census on. If we were going to keep SROs, those would be two school buildings that we would keep SROs in. And so I just really wanted us to take a look at if we are going to be transitioning to less punitive, more supportive, that we start with at least restoring one AP in Edison to help with some of that support, and then adding an additional to INT. And the reason why I wasn't sure how that would be brought up in tonight's conversation is because I know that we are cutting, all schools are taking the brunt of this, and I wanted to make sure that if we were able to go back and forth with things at central office, that we should be able to at least find money to restore for at the least those two schools, just because of how the ratios and the student makeup and school climate of those schools exist.
So Commissioner Shepard, I'll just add, that was part of the earlier conversation so that we can try to finalize some of these. And I can speak for myself. that was also, I used Edison as an example to try to get this board to the 6 million from East, because I recognized that they have a large number of students. They certainly have a large number of special education, disproportionate to other high schools. And we, I just felt that there is inequitable funding right there. But we decided on the 4.5, and Sean's going to be presenting that shortly in greater detail. But what I would ask you is that if you have this request, that if you have any ideas where the funding would actually come from, because we're still stuck on other positions. So if you have an idea, I think this would be the time to share with the board where the funding would come from to restore 1 to 2 positions.
Yes, I already submitted a list of where money can be pulled from. I also know that we are still talking about positions that may not go into central office. And so what I'm asking is for us first to decide that that's something that's important to us that we will want to have restored for some of the reasons that I said today. And then the second thing would be for the administration to hear that and then see where that money can be pulled from.
So for me, and then I'll let other commissioners speak on their position. I absolutely, that's what I was pushing for. Again, and requesting 6 million for me so that we're not looking at further reductions across all other schools except that one school. So for me at this time, I don't even feel like we've settled on some of the requests that we had through the poll. So I just don't see, you want to send me the list, I'll definitely take a look at it in terms of where you identified additional reductions. But at this time, it's going to be a no. I still feel like I'm still fighting to keep an executive director of multilingual education that services all schools. So that's where I stand on it. And also because I believe that East should have gave more. But I'll poll the other commissioners if you want me to straw poll everybody now. Is that what you want me to do?
If I can just offer, we share your concerns. Obviously, we want all of our buildings to be safe and secure, and we will go back and talk to the chief and see what we can do to get some extra support for Edison and integrated arts, if at all possible. So we share that, and we'll do our best to try and find some extra support there. I will go back and say everything we did, we started with a formula. Sometimes formulas and formula-based, you do have to tweak it. We have done a little bit of that, but we are certainly willing to go back and dig a little bit deeper at those 2 buildings.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yes.
Just wanted to note, and I know most people probably caught it, but it's best. Somebody articulates a concern like Commissioner Shepard did. That's why it's great to have 7 members of the board. Everybody has their own perspective. Everybody has offered up of various opinions, and I think that was what accounted for Commissioner Powell saying we had so many different things, but accounting for very serious issues. And Commissioner Shepard brings up another good one. And I don't want folks to miss this. This is how good government works. The leader of our district right now, Linda Quick, says, okay, let's look at that because that's a legitimate issue that is raised. So I just want to applaud, and again, I don't want anybody to think this is being condescending. I just want to recognize good work, good government. Commissioner Shepard says, hey, listen, and she's right. I've been to Edison. All of our colleagues have been there. We know what the issues that she's talking about. It's essentially an issue of fairness and putting on too much for good leaders. So thank you, Commissioner Shepard, for recognizing that. This budget is not in just yet. And thank you once again, Deputy Superintendent Quick, for identifying a legitimate issue and trying to figure out how it can be accommodated. Thanks. That's it.
Okay. Did anybody else want to share? Okay. So we're actually going to move, if there's no other questions on 6, 8, oh, Commissioner Elliott.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mike about the status of the FMP at this point. If he could give me a little update about where is the FMP at?
Sure, thank you. Absolutely, Vice President Elliott. Right now, the legislation has been introduced. So it is in the process of being evaluated back in the Education Committee as well as Ways and Means. The original submission of the legislation, excuse me, was at 615 million, and the revised legislation was at 550 million. So we're working with Assemblyman Gant and the remainder of our delegation to hopefully move this through in this legislative session. So I'm optimistic, but I don't want to spike the football yet by any means.
So what's the FMP doing at this point? The board itself?
We are in direct conversations with the assemblymen, the delegation, as well as other members of the assembly to respond to questions in regards to the different.
So that's the work. That's the work that the FMP board is doing currently.
Yes, very much.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So if there's no other questions from board members on these sections, we're going to wrap up on this section. We're going to have Sean Nelms and his team present his full disclosure of all the cuts. I know that he gave a summary, I think last week, but I've requested something more detailed as other administrators in our CSD. We've required it of Linda and Bob and Anne Marie, just to be fair, so that there's a broader understanding of where these cuts are coming from. And then if anyone has questions, this was also emailed to all of the board members, the details last week as well. And so Sean or Carlene, whoever's going to be present. Oh, there's Sean. Sorry, Sean, you just popped up.
Yeah.
So I will I'm going to turn it over to you, and then if folks have questions, and then we'll be wrapping up this section.
All right, 1 second. All right. Hey, Lex, I'm about to go on a call, so don't turn the mixer. My daughter's about to bake a cake, so I tell her to turn the mixer on. Good evening, everyone. We have two versions of the PowerPoint presentation. One was to have a ton of details, but again, as I explained last week, some of those details involve potential cuts to programs, and it also has cuts to the specific staffing. So we have never presented in detail line by line in terms of the FTE cuts, because it throws people off, especially without the master schedule being fully completed yet, because kids haven't finished the semester. So if I can share the overview, and I provided all the details to the board members, so I can answer any questions about those, but I think it would be dangerous, because we are one school. If I was listing 10 cuts across the district, then people would not be able to identify themselves. But by putting that out here now, and I was speaking to the employees, it could cause big issues. So I guess my request is, I've given the details to the board. I'm more than happy to answer those questions out loud. I just think it could cause unnecessary angst if people can see the cut specifically that may be accounted for themselves.
Sean, I would just like to point out, though, that in our board budget book, a lot of the cuts people are easily able to identify, because only one person is in that position. So I hear you, but it's a practice that we do across the entire district. And it's unfortunate, but that's what we do.
Well, we don't do it by school. We do it in the aggregate. So if, just for example, if Bob were to say, I'm gonna reduce 20 math FTEs, it's by seniority. And so it would be hard for someone to determine how that might impact him until they see all the layoffs, retirements, et cetera. I'm more than willing to share that, but I'm just gonna caution and say, because we're looking at one specific school, when you go into that level of detail, we run the risk of causing unnecessary angst, especially not knowing how the layoffs are going to play out in the end. But if that's what you would like me to do, I'm more than happy to do that. I just think it may cause unnecessary angst, and you all have that detailed information. So I will follow your lead.
Just for clarification, are you saying that you may have a presentation that says one math teacher, and that one math teacher will be able to know who they are by the presentation?
It will depend. So people in the building know what the seniority is. For example, last week when we presented our budget, and I'm sure some board members did too, immediately started receiving text messages or emails saying that means that my position is cut next year. We had to calm them down last week and say, this is a proposed budget. It hasn't been voted on yet. We're going to see about retirements, because there are some retirements that are still out there that may not impact them, because they may not be necessarily laid off from East, but they may be laid off in the district because of bumping. So like the mid-year point, we lost.
But how would anyone in the community know that? I'm confused. I would just like the presentation, Sean, with the details. I don't.
All right, I'll share it. And I'm going to caution the board that this could be problematic, especially with the master schedule not being done. But I'll share it if that's what your request is, Commissioner.
Hold on. Let's see what the board's desire is. I appreciate what Commissioner LeBron is saying, but the board has to make this decision.
Van, just so for clarity, I requested this presentation because we have a board budget book that has details that the community has access to, and that one page was not enough. We have been hammering Linda and Bob and Anne Marie for more and more details every single time. So I did request this. So Sean was already aware of what was being requested before today. I'm just
what I thought was being requested was to go into the board log, which I submitted. And so although we did do 2 presentations for today, what I'm saying to you is what we presented to the board is in its detail. If you want us to share that slide and the board
you
wants
can
that,
see the slide with personnel, but there are other details in terms of the cuts are not all personnel cuts. So I'm not understanding why it can't be presented in the same format that we require Linda and we were requiring Terry and his team and administration to submit a budget.
Well, I just explain that. I think because when you're looking at the budget in an aggregate, so Terry and his team or Linda did not go school by school and look at each individual school's budget. And I understand why, because there's a lot of moving parts, nor should they at this point in the budget cycle. No district does that. But I'm saying to you, if we're talking about a specific school and their specific budget, it may cause unnecessary angst. I'm more than willing to do it if the board wants that. But I think I'm doing my due diligence in saying to you, when you focus on the individual school and the budget, that you are, and you do it for all the schools, you can run the risk of having issues. But if that's what you want, LeBron, if that's what I would do that.
Hold on, Van, hold on, because Sean was aware that this was made. I just want to put this out there, and had plenty of opportunities. You could have put it in a PowerPoint that said we're going to eliminate 10 FTE teaching positions. I don't need to know the details.
That's what I have. That's what I presented last week.
Or not an English teacher, a math teacher, social studies, but there are other details that were presented that should be presented publicly.
And that's what I presented last week.
I'm not on this
slide. So Kelly, can you show the slide that I have, and then we can look at that as a collective group. And if you want more details, we can dig into the others. This other is in the aggregate that I have prepared for tonight.
This is what I was going to say. Why not just try the original present, all the detail, and then if Commissioner LeBron or other board members has further concerns about the detail, there's a number of ways to approach that. But I think the cautious way is see what the more general proposal looks like first. And if that's not sufficient, then let's try to address it at that time. He's obviously concerned that it might.
Van, I do want to point out that we do school profiles, and there are cuts reflected in the school profiles. I know because I put together an entire tally around all of the high schools and the cuts that they were experiencing and where those cuts were going to lay. So again, let's look at the first PowerPoint. Van, you're kind of cutting in and out, and I don't know if it's my laptop or yours, but your visual camera went off.
I'm here. So I think we're in agreement. Let's see his first presentation first. If that's not sufficient, we'll see what happens next.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks for understanding that, commissioners. Kelly, do you want to show the PowerPoint slide? This is an update from what I shared previously. And I can't control this. So the next slide, please. These are the overall and general reductions. We tried to include the section number with the page number for the board and for the community to understand where to find those operating budgets and those special aid funds, which we explained. So I'll go through those. Once again, the total FTE cuts up top is 17.4 reductions. Those are made up from retirements, some reductions, and some vacant positions that we are not going to fill. Some of those positions were positions that were previously staffed under grants. So we had to reduce all the way down. So for example, if we take on 200 additional students, we would not have the staff members to be able to expand to hire for them. So we're working closely with enrollment to ensure that what the numbers are will meet the number of kids who are in the building. So just for a budgeting standpoint, the master schedule, this is for the public, the master schedule determines how many sections of a course you need based on student request and need. Since the end of the year is not done, this is applicable for all schools throughout the state right now. Once the Q4 market period grades are done and we understand how kids fare in terms of they're moving on to 9th grade or 10th grade or whatever, then you assign for those number of kids divided by the number of kids per section, how many teachers you would need. So FTEs kind of shift and shape across the district based on the overall needs of the kids throughout the district. So for any district to say right now we need 10 math teachers is a best guess at most, because you don't know how many kids are going to pass or fail that course at the end of the school year. So when you look at FTEs, you look at that as a fluid process. but we're saying that regardless of what the outcome is for our student need, that you will see a 17.4 reduction in FTE. That may require some classes to be much larger than historically done, and some may be smaller, but that shifts every single year and every school goes through that. And that's something that's just done as from a master scheduling standpoint in every district across the state. With those reductions comes benefits. So the benefits would be associated with the number of staff members that you are reducing. So that estimated of $1.49 million is associated between staff reductions and benefits. The next line item are our operating reductions. These come from a ton of different lines that we move. And for example, for the fact that we all gave Chromebooks home to students, let's say 99% of those come back, and the 1% that don't come back, or they come back broken, you have to fix. That money will have to shift from one line item to another to replace that 1% of Chromebooks that may be damaged or need to be repaired. So you have to be fluid within your operations number also, because things happen. Mike Schmidt just explained that with his line item for school repairs. So within section 7, we move money in and out of line items to be able to account for what we think is most important and a priority this year. Some things we have to put off until 2021-22. But we did that at the tone of $1.25 million. Special aid, we've talked about with the board in the past and with the district around our special aid funds. Special aid is a fancy way to say grants. So that's usually your Title I or your 1003A funds. And the federal government gives us our Title I funds typically in October on their cycle. And so one of the requests that was made by the previous administration is to have those funds available up front. We always said that's always available. We don't control special aid funds. That comes into the district and then it's assigned to East. And so if the district wants to take that funding July 1 and then just replace it when the grant funds come October, that's fine with us. But that would be a give, because in the past it's gone back to the district at different times of the year when they decide to take it. Sometimes that was in January, other times it was at the end of the school year. So we tried to account for the belief that East was holding money and making sure that's all available up front so that we can get the aid money when it comes in. I'll be honest, if for some reason federal aid does not come in, we're going to be in trouble, because we're counting on that funds to come in. That we'll have to make some pretty drastic mid-year cuts. And every district is doing, a lot of districts budget that way also. It's what the state recommends us to do. And then the average versus actual salaries we've talked about as well in previous board meetings. The average versus actual means that the district budgets on an average salary, which they look at the total number of teachers in the district, what is the average cost of a district, and then that's the number that's kind of charged to the school, and it's reconciled at the end of the year when they find out what's the average versus the actual cost of those teachers in the building. East has a staff that's less experienced. And so we calculated with the finance team that number would be around $700,000. And so those numbers go into the total cost of $4.6 million or 20%. Just for the public to remember, the original number we were going to return to the district was about a little less than 10%, about 9% of our budget. And we decided to do more to support the request of the board at the time. And we wanted to do the best we could. We got to 20%. The number of $6 million was never a number that the board identified as a whole for us to cut, and nor was it an expectation for us to do so. But we really thought we were trying to do our due diligence by taking the hit like everyone else and trying to minimize our staffing and our resources for this upcoming year, knowing that we could push some of these cuts off and some of these services off till 2021-22.
All right, so this exact presentation was already done, and I requested more details because the community has a right to also understand, in the same way that they go through this budget book and have gone through this process, the details of all of these cuts. And so this was already presented. So I will remind my board colleagues, this was already presented. I met with staff and said that was not detailed enough for this community. And these are public records. So I just want to put it out there, because if he does not want to present it and the board does not willfully want him to present it and supports that, I will be requesting for board staff to post it. It is public record. None of this is ours to hide and keep and know by ourselves. So I just want to put it out there. So I'm not satisfied with the same presentation that was already done, which led me to request the details so that we have an understanding of exactly what areas are actually being cut, where money is being moved from, and so forth.
That's fine. Callie, can you share the other presentation so that Commissioner LeBron is satisfied? So I don't want to give the impression that anyone's hiding anything. I'm just was being respectful of the staff and the support services that are associated with the budget cuts, and we'll make sure they have that. And this was given to the board before our last board meeting, and it's given to the board before this one as information to share. So there was no one hiding anything because it was already made available.
As I requested them to
So
follow up.
now we're going to go with the board presentation in its entirety. Carlene, would you like to explain line by line what these things are?
Absolutely.
Thank you. You can go by title so that we'll answer those questions later when people ask.
Sure. So the first slide up is the absolute detail, and everything again will tie back exactly into the first page that Sean had provided previously. We are showing the exact breakdown of the 17.4 FTE reductions, and again the corresponding benefit savings. So again, Commissioner LeBron, I don't have control of the screen, but you can scroll down through there. What you're going to see is there's one administrative position that has been cut. We have 12.4 teaching, meaning instructional positions being cut, and then 4 non-instructional positions being cut. That leaves us with very little remaining in our FTE count, all of which has been accounted for this current year. We actually just pulled the postings down until things settle out because we understand there will be shifts within staffing, just as Sean had stated, based on seniority. So again, we're just holding tight. Every single position that we have open, which is all of 3.8, is accounted for. And I can give those to you as well. Right now they're allocated as 1.0. And again, these are remaining. This is all we have left at East. 1.0 in special ed, 1.0 in elementary education, and 1.0 in science. Those are all currently opened. And then we have 2 teacher leader positions, and then that's it. Everything else has been cut to the absolute extreme. If we go to
so just to be clear on that slide, that would be for any expansion at 6th grade. You can tell where we have those cuts. Anticipating that we receive more special ed students. We've worked with Keisha Morgan and her team on that. Also, if we add more 6th grade students, that's where the elementary position comes in. And that's the accounting for those positions if we were to expand at those grade levels. And that's part of the agreed upon EPO plan that was approved in February, was to expand our numbers at grade 7 and at grade 9 by an additional 20 to 40 students.
Right.
And so can I just ask how many of those positions that are being eliminated, either vacant or retiring?
How many are currently vacant? I would have to go back down through and count those for you.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that. I didn't realize you wanted that when you had asked for this information last week. I'd be happy to prepare that for you.
Yeah, I had questions on it too. So currently vacant, but also retiring.
I can certainly get that to you.
Yeah.
Carly, you would also have to know how many people are actually transferring also, since transfer day has not been completed.
Right, we don't have that yet. All I do know is that we only have 1 retirement at this point in time. That's all that I have been made aware of.
So just for the public's consumption, once again, there are many factors that go into staffing. One is retirement, another is attrition, which means teachers leave and they don't come back. Another is transfer day. And the most important one is the master schedule. Master schedules are not done at this time of the year. So any district and any organization that talks about scheduling, it is a best guess until the master schedule is done. We know what students need. Again, I'm sure the board knows that, but I want to make sure the community understands that any staffing or faculty numbers are at this point a best guess. It's the reason why I wanted to be reluctant in what I shared there, because what could happen, honestly, is we may get low 6th grade enrollment and a higher high school enrollment in special ed, which means you have to move a staff member from one area to another. When the EPO was created, it was created to have the total budget be approved by the board. And then the EPO has the rights and responsibilities to move that budget accordingly. When the budget was approved for us on February 27th, we began to make plans. We then adjusted those plans in March, and we're adjusting those plans again now. So I just want to be clear that the budget has been approved. We're working within that budget, and things will shift and change we will not exceed the budget that we have agreed to. You can continue, Carlene. Thank you.
Right. Next slide, please, Kaleo. Thank you. Okay, then we get into the operating reductions, and specifically, as Sean has stated in the past, one of the areas, or one of our main focus here was to avoid impact to instructional areas within our budget when we had to go through and make the reductions. So we have actually ended up cutting $811,000 out of the administrative portion of the budget that is primarily composed of vendor contracts. To the sensitivity, again, that Sean has mentioned numerous times, we have not yet met with all those vendors. And that total cost reduction within the vendor contracts will be approximately $568,000. We did cut instructional supplies of $75,000 in that area, and we also cut the contingency reserve by an additional $100,000. So again, the entire administrative budget, as given to the board, was a cut of $811,000. The next section down is actually the lower school. The lower school has the smallest portion of the budget. It's still on the same slide, Callie. I'm sorry. It's just that middle blue line there, bluish gray line. The lower school has been cut by $70,000, primarily in textbooks and substitute costs. We have been very diligent about funding textbooks in the past, so we have communicated with the principals that this is a year that we will need to hold up. The last section down, again on the same slide, is showing the reduction in the upper school. That's showing a reduction of $375,000. What you'll notice there is this, Commissioner LeBron, ties right back into the 12.4 FTE cuts of the instructional side. It's predominantly the reduction in the extended day stipend for the teachers that were included within the FTE reduction. So you have a cut there of $123,000 specifically. We also have a reduction, as Sean had stated, when you had asked where would the impact be felt, he stated it would be in curriculum writing and in-service training. So we have a reduction there of $97,000. That's non-contractual. And we lastly, in the upper school, similar to the lower school, have a reduction of $80,000 in textbooks this year. It's not to say that we won't need to raise those levels again in future years, but we are doing without this year to meet the 20% reduction in our overall expenditures. And Callie, on the next slide down, this is the detailed description of special aid. So again, as Sean had stated, and again, working very closely with Bob and Brian in finance, the special aid reduction to our general fund now, and again, that's moving money. In this particular case, it's moving people out of our general fund, reading teachers, and placing them directly into the special aid fund. So there's really nothing extraordinary to look at here. You're looking at salaries that of those individuals as well as their benefits. And that is coming back then into the general fund collectively in excess of $1.2 million when you take a look at the very bottom line. And the last item down, as Sean has clearly discussed already, was the $704,000 realization of actual salaries versus average salaries versus actual salary difference. And that's it. That's all that we have. There is nothing to hide, totally transparent. It is given a line by line reduction of every area that we had seen a reduced amount, reduced expenditure, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I'll see if anybody has questions. I have a few, but any of my colleagues have questions. So I just want to point out that when the response, this was part of the board question log, and the answers and all of that is on the web, but I am going to request that when the budget goes to City Council, that this presentation, but I know it's written in a different format, it's not a PowerPoint, that it is included in section 7 when it goes to City Council, so that they have an understanding of the breakdown as well. And then I just have a question on the textbook cuts and if we have ever purchased textbooks through the central office or general funds for
We
East
have.
High School.
Yeah, very good question. When we had first started, the textbooks were being purchased through East. And so that line has actually been left in our budget because of it's been handled differently on different years. So in the last 2 years, we had textbook purchases going through Central. And I know that between the textbook area and myself, we have had discussions, which way do we go? It's more prudent for us to put the money in and to have it there should we be called upon to use it, than not to have it and then be called upon to use it. So certainly that's something we can continue to work through with the textbook area. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
And Commissioner LeBron, I do need clarification. I have given more detail here than what is in the budget book. In actuality, as you saw in the other sections where you were asking questions about variable expenditures and such, this is much more detailed than any other section within the book. So I'm happy to accommodate, but I would think it would be harder for the finance team because they're going to have to create something special for East that the other schools don't have to provide. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your request, so I know how to work with Bob with Bob and Brian.
So Carlene, what you have already submitted to the board, it was kind of in a Word doc PDF format versus the PowerPoint. And I'm asking that then be printed and submitted, or not printed, but attached to the budget book as an attachment to the section on East, which is section 7, so that City Council, when they get the budget, what's in this draft right now is not reflective of the 20% cuts of the 4.6 million, so that they get it as an attachment saying here are the additional cuts and where they're coming from. And I don't think it requires any additional work on your end, and it just requires Bob and his team to ensure that they attach that part to section 7.
Commissioner LeBron, but
Yes.
does it have to, couldn't it be in the, couldn't the reductions be in the form that's already presented in that section? I guess I don't understand the additional.
Yeah,
request.
so Bob right now and his team, they did send us a detailed memo of all of the cuts and changes and a
Right.
work region section. I don't know if you guys had a chance to review that, but that was sent to all of us by Friday as we requested, with the understanding that they weren't going to make a lot of changes throughout the different sections that they are making the changes in until it goes to City Council. So I guess it would be up to Bob if he wanted to take a cut at looking at the sections of the ECPO where it's going to be cut. But I don't know who, or if Carlene wants to work with Bob on where we're going to make cuts. But I'm just saying we are reflecting the cuts through a memo format for this board till we get to a vote. And then Bob and his team are going to make the actual changes section by section before it goes to City Council. And so I don't know how the East cuts are going to be represented, because right now in that memo, it doesn't mention East because Bob's not responsible to give us the details in the memo format for East. He was responsible for all the other sections. So I see Bob's on, if you want to jump in, Bob.
Before Bob answers, Bob, can you tell me, I don't know what was presented Friday to the board. So which number is in the presentation that you guys gave on Friday?
No, they gave us, so Sean, because there's so many changes back and forth in the last couple of weeks in the budget, what we have in this draft is not reflective of where we're gonna end up landing at. And so it was too much for Bob and his team to go back section by section and change all of the details from all of the pages. What we requested from Bob was a format written memo of every section that was either a position was getting restored and where the funding was coming from and what page it was going to be reflected on later. So we will be voting on this draft with that memo until they make the changes before it goes to City Council. It was just too much work for his team to go page by page by page to change and update all across the entire budget book.
Commissioner LeBron, but to your point, the changes that were presented by East tonight will be changed line by line in the budget book that gets transmitted to East High after we voted. So no standalone memo is going to be necessary. The numbers are going to that get sent to City Hall are going to balance to what was presented and what the board approved.
No one's asking for a standalone memo. I'm not sure where.
I thought that's exactly what you were asking, was that.
No, I'm not. Bob already gave us a memo, just so you guys know. Bob already emailed us a memo with the changes.
Okay,
and that was
so please restate what it is that you wanted inserted into the East High section, because that section's going to change before it goes to City Hall.
right. So it can change before it goes to City Hall. We are voting on a memo that Bob presented with the changes and any additional changes that happen from here to Thursday. Bob is doing it in a memo written format because we don't have time to go back and redraft this budget book at this moment. So I'm saying we can use what Carlene has already provided to the board in terms of the detail to vote for East. It can also, I don't know who's going to redraft the East budget section, but what we've allowed Bob to do is write a memo with the details. They've already submitted the details to us in writing. We need something to vote on that reflects the actual changes, so we know that we're voting on things that were changed. John?
Just so I'm clear, because I'm a little confused. So what's going to be presented to City Council will be a complete budget book with all the numbers updated, correct?
Everything updated, yes.
So if and when those numbers, because these numbers that currently we've spoken to today have already been submitted to Bob and his team to adjust, because it doesn't have an impact on the district, even though East is somewhat standalone. So if those numbers are reflected in the budget book as our final numbers, the City Council has nothing to compare to in terms of any changes, because they're going to get one book. They're not really concerned with all the changes that have happened in the last month and a half. They're going to be just concerned with the numbers they get in that one book. So as long as Bob and Carlene, or Bob's team, inputs the numbers that Carlene has already submitted, then there should be nothing in addition for East to submit, correct?
Correct. I'm not asking East to submit anything else. I'm asking, one, who's going to make the changes in the budget book for Section 7, but two, for the board to understand that we have to vote on a finalized budget. We're not going to have it in the traditional budget draft format, because there are so many changes in the overall budget book. We agreed to a memo that Bob already wrote. He might have to make a few more changes, we don't know, but he's already submitted a detailed memo. You guys also have submitted the details you just presented in writing, and this is what the board will have to use to vote on the budget book. We're not going to have it in this traditional format right now with the revisions in here. It'll just be memo or detailed in what you guys presented.
Right.
Commissioner? Oh,
yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted, do you want me to go? Okay.
Go ahead,
I just wanted to say that my entire, every number that you have on this document, within this document, has been turned over to Brian. Brian and I have worked very closely. We actually have reconciled our spreadsheets. That was done before the last board meeting. So central office has every single detail that I've given you as far as updating the budget. And again, I'm happy to accommodate. I wasn't made aware of a summary memo. I'm happy to go through that with Bob and Brian if they feel that we need to do that. But there's absolutely been nothing that's been withheld. It's all down at central office.
So Commissioner,
anything was withheld. I just want to clarify in terms of the budget, but we have to vote on the changes. And go ahead, Cynthia.
So the changes that are going to be in narrative form is what the board will vote on May 7th, not having the updated budget book.
Exactly.
Okay. But will City Council have the updated draft book on May 14th?
Yes.
All right.
And that includes, just for clarity, because we discussed this at the last meeting, and it was last week, and we asked Bob to present a narrative form on the changes. But I'm saying, given the East changes and the details, we should combine those. This is just for the vote to have an understanding of those changes.
All right. Thank you. I'm clear.
May 14th, Bob will have us, well, we're going to get the link to the PDF. We
Yes.
will not get another hard copy to print until after City Council votes and that budget is 100% finalized on both governmental entities, just for clarity. So we'll get a PDF version. Van?
Yeah, I think that what they presented today, because there's two issues here. One, the big budget book that City Council will get, and I think everybody's on the same page there, that is going to be remodified by Bob based on the information he already has from East. So that's not an issue. That he's got to recreate the budget so that it's consistent and it's all presented to City Council. So we're good there.
Right.
The question is, does the board need something for its vote on Friday? A memo, a
Thursday.
summary, or what they presented to us today to slip in Thursday, to slip into the East section. Unless somebody needs something more, I think what they provided today, the more generic one and the very specific one, tells us what the reductions are. So somebody can summarize that if they want to, but the board has, through your request today, there was a presentation a detailed presentation with respect to where the cuts were, where ended up being. These things we could, but the board knows, because your concern, Commissioner LeBron, is making sure the board has the information it needs to make the decision on Thursday. And I'm saying we have that. Because you asked for this presentation today, you got a very detailed presentation. Everybody got a very detailed presentation with respect to where the budget for East ended up. Literally, unless somebody has some additional questions or something they didn't understand, you can literally take whatever they presented today, insert it, and the board can make that decision. I mean, you could arguably ask for a summary, but I don't know that it's necessary.
I'm not asking for a summary. I just want for clarity.
But I don't think it's necessary.
Van, can you hear me? I'm sorry. Am I cutting off or are you cutting?
I can hear you.
Van is.
Okay.
No, I can hear you.
So for clarity, we asked administration. You can hear me? We asked administration, Bob and his team, for the details in writing because we were not comfortable voting on just a PowerPoint. And all I'm saying is we should have the same expectation for the ECPO. However, they have submitted the information in writing as a Word doc PDF that came last week. Yes. I just want to put it out there. I'm saying we use that instead of, I'm not asking them to create any additional memos. We already have the details, but we need to vote on the changes in writing and that we use what they have already submitted to us to finalize that along with Bob Franklin's memos with all the details of all the changes in all the areas. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we're good.
You had your hand raised? Oh, is that old? Okay, sorry. So was I clear? Like we'll just use both things in writing and that'll be what's voted on essentially as the budget along with parts of what's in hard copy in format right now. Commissioner Elliott. You gotta unmute. Yeah, I'll unmute you if I can.
I just want to know where we are at this point in this budget process. It seems to me that we've got it worked out with East, and it seems to me that the only thing that may be outstanding is Commissioner Shepard's proposal. Am I correct about that, or are there some other areas?
No, there's some other areas. So for me, it's still the Executive Director of Multilingual and Foreign Studies. I still don't feel that we should be promoting anybody, and you heard that tonight. That person would get a 55% increase in salary. We should not be supporting that. There's a matter to go into executive session for a position that's listed.
I'm sorry, again, we cannot be talking about personnel matters.
I can mention that an individual is going to get a 55% salary increase. Absolutely. I'm not mentioning names, nor did I actually mention titles. So there is an absolute way to have conversations about these things.
I just need to check, it's 5%, not 55. 5. right?
So a director is going from a director to an executive director and 3 position eliminations, and it's a 5% increase. Well, I need to see the salary for that person currently. We could talk about it in executive.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So for me, no, but if other people feel that comfortable voting on this budget, I'm not going to stop anybody from voting what they believe in.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to sort of follow up on what Vice President Elliott said. I do think there is some consensus about where we're at in terms of what is left. As I indicated, I appreciate Commissioner Shepard bringing up that issue. We're 7 board members, but thankfully we think about different things at the same time. So she brought up something that is, I know, important to a number of my colleagues, myself included. And then we saw Deputy Superintendent Quick respond to that quickly, no pun intended, and say, hey, listen, we'll look into that. We'll follow up on that. I do see that as the a remaining issue, but in recognition of the journey traveled thus far, that's one of the major ones. Now, let me just say, Commissioner LeBron, to your point of the executive director position, I think Deputy Superintendent Quick has, and her team, it came up with a good compromise, so to speak. They have identified 2 positions that need to cover this very important area, bilingual studies, for this community. And we have struggled in the past, and a number of groups and organizations have rightly identified that issue. That is sort of how they felt we should respond. Let me just say, I think your idea of an executive director and folks that have asked for that has merit. But if that is where people are drawing the line in the sand, I see a lot of good things that in fact folks are advocating for executive director for multilingual studies. A lot of things will get lost if we say, well, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Commissioner LeBron, if we don't do that, you won't have my vote. I simply can't. I'm speaking for myself. I simply can't and won't be put in that position. What I can say and hope and pray for is that with a new superintendent, we can re-examine this issue. We have always, and perhaps not so wisely, but we have always, and the law is such that we could always amend the budget. This issue is not dead. I think they have offered up some progress to address an important issue, but just for me, given the progress that they have made, given the willingness to even consider the significant suggestion offered by Commissioner Shepard, I just couldn't see us saying no, because the reality is nobody is getting everything that they want in this budget. That's just the reality. I mean, you saw Superintendent Nelms talk about the significant and draconian cuts that his school is going to endure. We can go on for hours talking about the students that will suffer as a result of, not having the 32 social workers. So I hope people out there listening, in terms of the legitimately requested restoration of the executive director for multilingual studies, I hope they understand that there's been some compromise. Everybody can't get everything they want, and there's always tomorrow. We will have, sooner or later, a new superintendent. He or she will put their fingerprint on this important issue, but except where the hand of the board has moved us thus far in this budget.
Well, Van, I can appreciate that. What I'll say is that currently there is a director of ESL, a director of bilingual education, and an executive director of multilingual. So it does no service to reduce it when we already have a capital, a cap in the district on EOLs. Now that ESOL position is no longer funded. It was last year, but it is vacant. So I hear you, Van, and I've said this to any of my colleagues. You guys have to vote your conscience. I cannot vote for a budget that already has significant cuts that directly impact students while it creates new positions, executive director and director titles in central office. I don't care how great the wish is for those positions, but for me personally, it is having a wish list. I have a giant wish list of everything I wish we could restore every single social worker, every art teacher, every sports program, every extended learning program that was cut last year. I fought those. I didn't want to support that. And that's a wish list for me. So I fully support that we have to make cuts and sacrifices, but I will not support that there are cuts and sacrifices made while there are still additions and promotions for certain individuals and a host of other things happening. And I'll just say this, that we hired a superintendent who started this budget process, who is no longer with us right now, out on leave, whatever the case may be. And we still have an administration pushing for a budget that superintendent's vision he will not be here to carry out that vision. So I'm not understanding what the big push is to still keep some of these changes in place for someone who's not going to be here to carry it out. So I hear you, Van, and I say this to my colleagues, truly, and from not a place to want to be argumentative with my colleagues, I cannot support what I'm telling you I can see for myself in this budget with the changes that are being made. And what has happened and my experience in the last couple of weeks is that we have given directives and they'll come back with some directives that they listen to partially. And the prime example, Chief of IT, when I polled this board, it did not have the support of this board and they kept it in there and are pushing for it and cited some bogus audit from Roosevelt, New York. And then only one part of it didn't cite the entire audit, made me go and research and have to read an additional document. I don't want to play these games with adults and administrators. All I'm saying is I will not be supporting this budget. And that's where I'm still at. They have not convinced me yet of a yes vote. If they have convinced you guys, more power to you. And with that, I'm done. I don't know if any other commissioner has anything else to say, but if not, we're going to end up to wrap this up and go into executive session because there are some things that need to be addressed.
With that, I'll take back the gavel, or
thank you.
Get the gavel. Thank you very much, Commissioner LeBron. Let me just say, I know this has been a frustrating experience for you and for a lot of people, but we do appreciate it. I was talking to somebody just recently, the manner in which you have advocated and shepherded us, that's a phrase that we use in the law practice, moved us through this process. This was, we had prior chairs. They've all done admirable jobs, finance chair, but you have led us through a very difficult period where we've never experienced this kind of sort of drawing back from the feds and the states. So we do, I know it's been very frustrating for you. It's been for everybody, but we do appreciate your service at this very difficult time in the board's financial history. And as I've said, I think, I was texting somebody earlier on, we're going to get through this. And I think there's some level of pride that when we get through this, that we all can share, because we all, while you chaired it, we all got through it together, including Linda and her team, the board, and countless thousands of employees who've had to endure the nail-biting process of knowing whether they were going to have jobs or not while they were trying to deal with COVID. So with that being said, I wanted to piggyback on something before we go into executive session. I want to piggyback on something that Adam said, which has us all thinking in a forward-thinking kind of manner. We have got, and Commissioner Adams and I were talking about this earlier on, my wife and I were talking about it earlier on, I'm sure some of you guys are talking, we got to figure out a way to make sure our seniors are able to celebrate even in this very difficult challenge. So I heard the Deputy Quick say that principals are working on it, but I would say to my colleagues, as Commissioner Adams did, as I did, get on the internet, come up with some ideas, talk to community partners. Perhaps there's a way we can supplement or add value to what the principals are thinking about, because we do need to, as Commissioner Adams says, recognize our kids and all this stuff, putting this budget to bed, finding a new superintendent. They can be very distracting from the ultimate goal, which is to get kids across the finish line. And we have students that are about to do that, and we don't want to short shift them in their celebration. So I'd encourage all of you, if you have some ideas about how we can recognize it, I've got some ideas myself. I hope we can turn our focus after Thursday to not only finding the next superintendent, but also figuring out how we're going to recognize our wonderful students in their end of their 4-year journey. So, all right, with that having been said, I need a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of talking about the terms and conditions of a number of employees. Is there a motion? I think I heard Commissioner Powell. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Vice President Elliott.
Commissioner Malloy, not me.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm on my cell phone. That was motioned by Commissioner Malloy. Vice President Elliott seconded it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? So, ladies and gentlemen watching on YouTube and on our district channel, we are going to go into executive session to talk about specific employees, which we're not allowed to talk about in public. And then we will reconvene, but it's very unlikely that we'll be voting on anything, so we'll just be adjourning. So if this is the last time you see us tonight, good night, and thank you for attending and watching your board in action. Good night.